Since the dawn of humanity, we have looked up at the vast starry blanket that covers us and questioned our existence, our purpose, and the mysteries that permeate creation. The ancient scriptures, in their timeless wisdom, don't just speak of a single heaven, but reveal the existence of three distinct celestial dimensions, each with specific purposes, but wonderfully interwoven in a cosmic tapestry of perfection that only a supreme intelligence could conceive. These three celestial dimensions, the atmospheric sky we contemplate daily, outer space with its infinite galaxies, and the transcendental realm beyond human comprehension, represent not just physical spaces, but states of consciousness and spiritual realities that permeate our existence. But what do these three heavens really mean, and what cosmic secrets do they hold that could fundamentally transform our understanding of the universe and our own souls? The first heaven mentioned in the sacred scriptures refers to the atmospheric realm that surrounds our planet like a precious protective cloak. When we raise our eyes to gaze at the blue sky during the day or the twinkling of the nearest stars at night, we are witnessing this first celestial dimension, the Earth's atmosphere. In Genesis, we find the creation of this firmament detailed with astonishing precision. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide waters from waters." And God called the firmament the heavens. The Hebrew word rakia, translated as firmament, carries with it the meaning of expanse or extension, a remarkably accurate description for a text written millennia ago, wouldn't you agree? This first heaven was designed with meticulous purpose. On the second day of creation, the Creator established a separation between the waters, those that would remain on the Earth's surface and those that would be suspended in the atmosphere. This careful division created the perfect environment for life to thrive. Isn't it fascinating how this creative act laid the foundations for the hydrological cycle that sustains all life on Earth? Evaporation, condensation, and precipitation, processes that our modern scientists study in detail, were orchestrated from the beginning with unparalleled precision. Our atmosphere, this first sky, is made up of distinct layers that work in perfect harmony. The troposphere, which extends approximately 16 kilometers above the Earth's surface, is home to practically all climatic phenomena. Above it, the stratosphere protects us from harmful ultraviolet rays through the ozone layer. This is followed by the mesosphere, thermosphere, and exosphere, each performing specific and vital functions. Is there any man-made structure that compares in complexity and efficiency to this atmospheric system? No human technology has ever achieved such a perfect balance between protecting and sustaining life. When we gaze at the sky during a storm or admire a sunset, we are observing the workings of this first sky in all its dynamic glory. The clouds, true suspended reserves of water, move through the winds as if following invisible choreographies. Psalm 114 describes it poetically, "He who makes the clouds his chariot, he who rides on the wings of the wind." What more powerful image could we conceive to describe divine control over the atmospheric elements? The air currents that cross continents, the nebulous formations that paint the sky, all are silent witnesses to a meticulous design. The first sky serves as a magnificent stage for demonstrations of transcendental power and beauty. When lightning cuts through the firmament on stormy nights, when rainbows emerge like colorful bridges after rain, when auroras borealis dance in the polar skies, all of this takes place in this first celestial dimension. These manifestations have inspired adoration and reverence throughout the ages. How could a phenomenon like the rainbow, scientifically explained by the refraction of light through water droplets, still retain its power to amaze the human soul? This is the paradox of the first heaven, scientifically explainable, but spiritually inexhaustible. The providing function of the first heaven is evident every day in our lives. It is through it that we receive the rain that waters our crops, the oxygen we breathe, protection from harmful radiation and meteorites. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 45, Jesus says that God makes his sun rise on the evil and the good, and makes it rain on the just and the unjust. This profound statement reveals not only the physical workings of the first heaven, but its spiritual dimension, a constant testimony to divine impartiality, to generosity that goes beyond human merit. Isn't this one of the most transformative lessons the firmament teaches us on a daily basis? The beauty of this first sky transcends its usefulness. How many times have you stopped your daily activities to contemplate a starry sky, an extraordinary sunset, or the majesty of imposing clouds? There is something almost sacramental about these moments of contemplation. The psalmist understood this deeply when he wrote, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows the works of his hands." The first heaven functions as a cosmic mirror, reflecting the beauty, power, and order of the divine. When we observe the perfection of this atmospheric system, we are inevitably led to contemplate its creator. Scientifically, this first sky is a miracle of physical and chemical balance. Our atmosphere maintains a delicately balanced composition, approximately 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, traces of argon, carbon dioxide, and other gases. Any significant change in this ratio would make life impossible. Atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, all these factors vary within the precise limits that sustain life. How can we explain that, in an apparently hostile universe, our planet has developed and maintained conditions so perfectly suited to human existence? Science can describe these processes, but can it really explain their ultimate origin? The atmospheric phenomena of the first sky also constantly remind us of the fragility and interdependence of all things. When we contemplate the formation of a storm, we observe a process that involves the warming of the oceans, the evaporation of water, the winds that carry moisture, condensation in the cold heights, a cosmic dance of interdependent elements. This intricate network of relationships teaches us about our own interconnectedness with the whole of creation. Isn't this one of the most important lessons for our times? In an age of exacerbated individualism, the first sky reminds us that we exist within larger, delicately balanced systems. Finally, this first sky represents the threshold of human transcendence. Since time immemorial, we have looked upwards with a desire for ascension, both literal and spiritual. Ancient myths are full of human attempts to conquer the heavens, from the Tower of Babel to the flight of Icarus. In the modern age, we have realized this dream through aviation and space exploration. But these technological achievements only amplify the mystery. The more we explore the first sky, the more we realize the unexplored vastness that stretches beyond it. Is this the ultimate purpose of the firmament? To serve as a portal that simultaneously awakens and limits our aspiration for the transcendent? Like a cosmic curtain, the first sky reveals enough of the divine to inspire searching, but conceals enough to demand faith. Raising our gaze beyond the Earth's atmosphere, we enter the vast and mysterious second heaven, the stellar realm that stretches for countless light years, home to billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars. This cosmic space transcends our immediate understanding, challenging our notions of time and distance. When we gaze at the night sky, we observe only an infinitesimal fraction of this vastness. The starlight that reaches our eyes began its journey millennia ago. Isn't it fascinating to think that we are literally looking into the past when we gaze at the night sky? This celestial dimension represents not only a physical space, but also a spiritual realm of profound significance in the sacred scriptures. The second heaven, in its physical dimension, is the stage for celestial wonders that ancient peoples observed with reverence. Planets, comets, meteors, nebulae, galaxies. These celestial entities have inspired myths, calendars, and religious systems throughout human history. When the psalmist wrote, "When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set, what is man that you should remember him?" He was expressing human amazement at the stellar immensity. Today, our telescopes reveal an even more astonishing complexity. Black holes devouring light, supernova explosions forging heavy elements, solar systems in formation. Isn't it amazing how each scientific advance, instead of diminishing the cosmic mystery, only deepens our perception of its grandeur? However, the scriptures reveal that beyond the observable physical reality of the second heaven, there is a spiritual dimension imperceptible to our ordinary senses. This is the realm where angelic and demonic forces exert influence over creation. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, the Apostle Paul describes this reality with remarkable precision. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." This verse transports us to a deeper understanding. The second heaven as an arena of cosmic spiritual conflicts that directly affect earthly life. Have you ever wondered why certain forces of destruction seem to operate so systematically in our history? The perspective of the second heaven offers an explanation that transcends reductionist materialism. Theological tradition identifies this second heaven as the realm where spiritual beings exert influence over entire nations and civilizations. The book of Daniel gives us an extraordinary glimpse of this reality when it describes how a heavenly messenger was detained for 21 days by the prince of the kingdom of Persia until Michael, one of the chief princes, came to his aid. This enigmatic narrative suggests that earthly empires have spiritual counterparts, entities that operate in the second heaven, influencing the course of human history. Consider the great historical transformations, the empires that rise and fall, the ideologies that conquer millions. Could it be that, behind these visible movements, invisible forces operate in a dimension that our scientific instruments cannot detect? The second heaven also represents the realm where spiritual influence is exerted over individuals. The scriptures describe how demonic entities, although not omnipresent, operate systematically to corrupt, deceive, and destroy. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, warns the Apostle Peter. This powerful metaphor suggests a predatory presence that operates beyond the physical plane, looking for points of vulnerability. In contrast, angelic beings act as messengers and protectors. Are they not all ministering spirits, sent out to serve those who will inherit salvation? Asks the author of Hebrews. This invisible battle for human destiny is constantly taking place in the realm of the second heaven, influencing thoughts, inclinations, and choices. How often do we experience inexplicable impulses for good or evil, sudden inspirations, or overwhelming temptations that seem to come out of nowhere? This second heaven, as a spiritual domain, is closely related to earthly power structures. Political, economic, cultural, and religious systems often reflect spiritual realities that precede and transcend them. When we observe the historical persistence of certain forms of oppression, injustice, and dehumanization across centuries and cultures, we can glimpse the workings of these powers and rulers of darkness mentioned by Paul. These are not merely flawed human systems. They are earthly manifestations of spiritual principalities operating in the second heaven. In the same way, movements of liberation, justice, and genuine compassion reflect the influence of angelic forces resisting the powers of darkness. Isn't this spiritual perspective an essential interpretative key to understanding the seemingly insoluble conflicts that persist in our collective history? The scientific study of outer space paradoxically brings us closer to this spiritual vision of the second heaven. Modern physics has revealed that the visible universe constitutes only approximately 5% of cosmic reality, the rest being made up of dark matter and dark energy, entities that we cannot observe directly, but whose existence we infer by their gravitational effects. This revolutionary discovery reminds us that reality vastly transcends our perceptual capacity. If 95% of the physical universe remains invisible to our most sophisticated instruments, how plausible is the existence of the spiritual dimensions that the scriptures describe? Contemporary cosmology itself, with its theories of parallel universes and extra dimensions, surprisingly echoes the ancient descriptions of heavenly realms beyond ordinary perception. The manifestations of the influence of the second heaven on humanity are often subtle, but profoundly impactful. Consider how certain ideas emerge almost simultaneously in different cultures, how artistic, philosophical, or scientific movements seem to emerge collectively, as if responding to common inspirations. Theologians such as C.S. Lewis have suggested that such synchronicities may reflect influences from the spiritual realm, both positive and negative, operating through the second heaven. Similarly, phenomena such as inexplicable genius, extraordinary creativity, or premonitory intuitions can be understood as moments of permeability between the earthly and heavenly realms. Have you ever experienced moments of clarity or inspiration that seem to transcend your own intellectual capacity? Such experiences can represent brief glimpses of the reality of the second heaven. The ancient esoteric and mystical traditions of various cultures, despite their differences, converge remarkably in describing this second heaven as an intermediate realm between the material and the purely divine. Jewish Kabbalists speak of different levels of the firmament. Islamic mystics describe the seven heavens. Neoplatonic philosophers have elaborated theories on celestial hierarchies. This multicultural convergence points to a universal perception of the existence of intermediate realms between the earthly and the transcendent. Although we must maintain critical discernment when exploring these traditions, their remarkable consistency suggests that they are describing, through different languages and symbols, aspects of the same cosmic reality. The second heaven as a dimension where spiritual forces interact with material reality. Finally, understanding the second heaven helps us to properly interpret historical and personal events that would otherwise remain unexplained. Why do certain prayers seem to be blocked, like the divine messenger detained by the Prince of Persia in Daniel's narrative? Why do genuine spiritual transformations often meet with systematic resistance? Why are there places that seem perpetually afflicted by conflict, while others seem blessed with lasting harmony? The perspective of the second heaven allows us to see beyond the immediate circumstances, recognizing the spiritual dimensions that inform them. This vision does not lead us to fatalistic passivity, but to a deeper understanding of the nature of our struggles, and of the spiritual authority we have been granted to transform seemingly immutable realities. Recognizing the reality of the second heaven, both in its physical stellar dimension and in its spiritual nature, radically transforms our understanding of the cosmos and our place in it. We don't merely inhabit a physical planet governed by mechanical laws, but participate in a cosmic drama that unfolds simultaneously in multiple dimensions. The decisions we make, the values we defend, the truths we proclaim, all of this has resonances that transcend the material plane. When we gaze at the starry sky, we are glimpsing not only the magnificence of the physical universe, but also the arena where invisible powers dispute the fate of creation. Doesn't this perspective give cosmic dignity to our seemingly insignificant existence in the face of the vastness of the universe? Beyond the Earth's atmosphere and the vast stellar universe, the scriptures reveal an even more sublime dimension, the third heaven. This transcendental realm is described as the very dwelling place of God, the heavenly paradise, the final state of perfection for which redeemed humanity is destined. When the Apostle Paul, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, recounts his extraordinary experience of being caught up to the third heaven, he offers us a glimpse of a reality so sublime that human words prove inadequate to describe it. "I have heard unspeakable things," he writes, "which man cannot express." What a profound mystery is hidden in this statement. An experience so transcendental that human language, with all its richness and nuance, proves completely inadequate to capture its essence. What could be so extraordinary as to transcend our capacity for expression? The third heaven represents the pinnacle of divine creation, not just in spatial terms, but in ontological perfection. While the first heaven, atmospheric, sustains physical life and the second heaven, stellar, manifests cosmic grandeur, the third heaven reveals divine glory in its purest and most complete expression. The theologian John Owen, in his writings on the glory of Christ, describes this realm as the place where divine holiness shines forth unhindered, where the communion between creator and creature reaches its absolute perfection. This is a fundamentally different reality from the lower realms, not only quantitatively superior, more vast, more beautiful, but qualitatively distinct. In the third heaven, the very nature of existence transcends the limitations of time, space, and materiality that we know. Have you ever tried to imagine what it would be like to exist in a state where the limitations of our earthly condition, the fragmentation of consciousness, bodily restrictions, the incompleteness of knowledge, were completely transcended? Biblical descriptions of this third heaven are necessarily metaphorical, as they seek to communicate transcendental realities through limited human language. In Revelation, John describes the New Jerusalem descending from heaven, with walls of jasper, streets of pure gold and transparent as glass, 12 gates made of singular pearls. These dazzling images should not be interpreted literally, as if the third heaven were merely a more luxurious version of material reality. On the contrary, they are attempts to convey, through symbols of the utmost preciousness and beauty, the ineffable glory of this transcendental realm. The symbolic nature of these descriptions does not diminish their truth. It merely recognizes that certain realities can only be grasped indirectly, through analogies and metaphors. When we contemplate these heavenly descriptions, we are not faced with mere comforting fantasies, but inspired attempts to communicate truths that transcend our ordinary experience. The most significant aspect of the third heaven is God's immediate and unmediated presence. While on earth we experience the divine presence veiled, as through a mirror in enigma. In the third heaven this communion reaches absolute perfection, face to face. This divine presence completely transforms the nature of existence. As the book of Revelation describes it, there will be no more need for the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light. This statement points to a reality where the divine presence itself becomes the fundamental organizing principle of existence. Imagine a reality where every aspect of experience, consciousness, perception, emotion, relationship, is completely permeated and transfigured by the divine presence, without the distortions, distancing, and obstacles that characterize our earthly experience. This is the essence of the third heaven, not a distant physical place, but a state of perfect communion with the divine. Contemporary theologian Wayne Grudem, in his work Systematic Theology, explains that the third heaven represents the culmination of the divine purpose for humanity, the restoration and elevation of the human condition to a state of glory that transcends even the original Edenic perfection. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve experienced communion with God, but were still subject to temptation and potential fall. In the third heaven, redeemed humanity is established in a state of irreversible perfection, where sin becomes not only absent, but ontologically impossible. This is a radical transformation of the human being itself, not a mere elimination of harmful desires, but a fundamental transfiguration of nature, now fully aligned with the divine and unable to deviate. Reflecting on this promise, don't we feel both wonder and relief at the prospect of an existence finally free of the internal contradictions that torment us? The temporal experience in the third heaven transcends our linear understanding of past, present, and future. Several theologians, including C.S. Lewis in his Reflections on Eternity, suggest that heavenly existence should not be conceived as an endless sequence of moments, infinite time, but as a reality that completely transcends temporality as we know it. This is the classic distinction between chronos, sequential, measured time, and kairos, temporal fullness, decisive moment. In the third heaven, each moment contains the fullness of all moments, a perfect simultaneity where nothing is lost, forgotten, or eagerly awaited. St. Augustine describes divine eternity as an eternal now, not the absence of time, but its transcendence and fullness. What would it be like to experience life without anxiety about the future or regret for the past? What would it be like to exist in an eternal present where every moment has absolute plenitude? Interpersonal relationships in the third heaven reach a depth and authenticity impossible in our current earthly condition. Theologians such as Jonathan Edwards and John Piper propose that, freed from the pride, insecurity, fear, and self-centeredness that corrupt our current relationships, glorified human beings will experience perfect communion with one another. This communion does not eliminate individuality. On the contrary, it allows each person to be more fully themselves, free from the distortions of sin. Paul's metaphor of the body of Christ, where each member retains its distinct function while participating organically in the whole, suggests that the heavenly community preserves and elevates personal uniqueness, while transcending isolationist individualism. In the third heaven, we will know and be known completely. An interpersonal transparency that in our present condition would be terrifying, but which in glorified perfection becomes the supreme realization of human social nature. Have you ever experienced rare moments of authentic communion, where masks fall away and genuine connection blossoms? The third heaven represents the perpetuation and perfection of these moments. The Christian mystical tradition, from Dionysius Areopagita to Teresa of Avila, suggests that profound mystical experiences can provide momentary glimpses of the third heaven even during earthly life. These spiritual raptures, similar to Paul's experience, represent extraordinary moments where the soul temporarily transcends the limitations of the fallen human condition and experiences something of heavenly glory. The Spanish mystic Saint John of the Cross describes these states as a transformative union, where the soul becomes divinized by participation. Significantly, those who report such experiences often emphasize their ineffability, the fundamental impossibility of adequately communicating what was experienced. Rather than discrediting these accounts as mere subjective hallucinations, we can recognize them as confirmations of the transcendental reality of the third heaven, a reality that occasionally breaks through into our ordinary consciousness, providing elusive glimpses of our ultimate destiny. Contemporary Christian philosopher Dallas Willard proposes that the third heaven should not be conceived as a reality completely discontinuous from our present existence. Instead, he suggests a relationship of continuous growth, where our highest experiences of beauty, truth, goodness, and communion in the present life are genuine, albeit incomplete, previews of the heavenly reality. When we experience transcendental moments, whether contemplating extraordinary natural beauty, engaging in deep interpersonal intimacy, or reaching revelatory intellectual understandings, we are, in a sense, touching the edge of the third heaven. These moments act as windows to eternity, providing glimpses of the reality for which we were created. This perspective transforms our understanding of earthly life, which is no longer merely a test to determine our post-death destiny, but a process of learning and transformation that prepares us to fully inhabit the heavenly reality. Wouldn't it be comforting to realize that our most significant experiences are not just ephemeral moments, but preparations for an eternal fullness? Corporeal existence in the third heaven is an often misunderstood aspect of Christian hope. Contrary to the popular conception of a purely spiritual or ethereal existence, the Orthodox Christian tradition affirms bodily resurrection as an essential element of heavenly hope. The resurrected body, however, is not simply the actual physical body restored, but a glorious transfiguration of human corporeality, what Paul calls the spiritual body in contrast to the natural body. This paradoxical language points to a reality that preserves true corporeality. We are not meant to be disembodied spirits, but transcends the limitations of materiality as we know it. The glorified body, exemplified by the resurrected Christ who walked through walls but also ate fish with his disciples, represents the perfect integration of spirit and matter, transfigured corporeality where the physical and spiritual dimensions are no longer in tension, but in perfect harmony. This vision offers a profound alternative to both contemporary materialism, which reduces the human person to physical processes, and Gnostic spiritualism, which seeks to escape materiality. In the third heaven, we will be more fully corporeal, not less, a transfigured corporeality that preserves and elevates the dignity of material creation. Finally, the third heaven represents the final resolution of the cosmic drama of redemption, what the scriptures call the new creation. This is not merely a return to the original Edenic state, but its transcendence and the complex relationship between the three heavens and human existence represents one of the most fascinating aspects of spiritual cosmology. Our daily lives, seemingly confined to the earthly dimension, are constantly influenced and shaped by forces and realities emanating from the three heavenly dimensions. From the air we breathe, which comes from the first heaven, to the invisible spiritual battles fought in the second heaven, and the transcendental hope that the third heaven offers us, we are permanently involved in an intricate web of celestial influences that permeate every aspect of our existence. What would our understanding of reality be like if we could perceive, at every moment, this profound interconnection between the heavenly realms and our seemingly mundane lives? The first heaven, our atmospheric environment, exerts a direct and constant influence on our bodies and our psyche. The circadian rhythms that regulate our sleep and wakefulness are synchronized with the cycle of light and darkness determined by the Earth's rotation in space. The seasonal variations resulting from the Earth's orbit around the Sun profoundly influence our mood, behavior, and even our spirituality. It's no coincidence that the great religious traditions have developed liturgical calendars aligned with natural cycles. Contemporary scientific research shows how exposure to sunlight affects the production of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, directly influencing our emotional mood and psychological well-being. Similarly, atmospheric phenomena such as storms, barometric changes, and variations in humidity impact not only our physiology, but also our spiritual receptivity. How fascinating it is to realize that what the ancients intuited, the connection between atmospheric states and soul states, now finds confirmation in the discoveries of neuroscience and chronobiology. The influence of the second heaven on humanity manifests itself in more subtle but equally profound ways. In their physical dimension, celestial bodies have always exerted fascination and guidance for human civilization, from ancient navigation systems based on the stars to calendars determined by lunar movements. This influence transcends the merely practical, reaching psychological and spiritual dimensions. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung observed how celestial archetypes, sun, moon, stars, consistently emerge in the dreams, myths, and artistic expressions of uncontacted cultures, suggesting a deep connection between the human psyche and the cosmos. In its spiritual dimension, the second heaven represents the battlefield where invisible forces vie for influence over nations, cultures, and individuals. When we observe recurring patterns of destructive behavior in certain regions, or the inexplicable resistance to positive transformations in certain contexts, aren't we glimpsing the terrestrial effects of spiritual conflicts waged in the second heaven? The reality of the third heaven, although apparently more distant from our immediate experience, paradoxically exerts the most transformative influence on human life. The awareness of a transcendental destiny, the hope of glory, fundamentally reconfigures our relationship with suffering, failure, and temporal limitation. When St. Paul states that the sufferings of this present time cannot be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in us, he is expressing how the reality of the third heaven provides a radically new interpretative context for our present experience. This perspective does not represent mere future consolation, but a present transformation, as the anticipation of heavenly destiny begins to produce its effects in our present life. As the Christian philosopher Peter Kreeft observed, heaven doesn't begin after death, it begins here. Heaven is not just our destination, it is our destiny, the direction in which we must travel already in this life. Isn't it this perspective of eternity that gives ultimate meaning to our present choices, sacrifices, and commitments? the interaction between the three heavens and human consciousness has manifested itself in extraordinarily diverse ways throughout history. Mystical experiences, visions, prophetic dreams, creative inspirations. These phenomena can be understood as moments of exceptional permeability between the heavenly dimensions and human consciousness. When artists report states of inspiration, where ideas seem to flow from an external source. When scientists describe insights that emerge complete after periods of impasse. When mystics experience states of expanded consciousness that transcend the ordinary limits of perception, we are potentially witnessing the direct influence of the heavenly realms on the human mind. Neuroscientist Andrew Newberg, studying the brains of people in deep meditative states, has identified patterns of neural activity that suggest that the human brain may be configured to experience transcendental realities. Could it be that our neurological structure has been designed precisely to enable this communication between heavenly dimensions and earthly consciousness? The great contemplative traditions developed specific disciplines to cultivate receptivity to heavenly influences. Practices such as inner silence, meditation on the scriptures, contemplation of nature, fasting and persistent prayer can be understood as methods for tuning in the consciousness to heavenly frequencies. As contemporary mystic Thomas Keating explains, these practices do not produce transcendental experience in themselves, but remove obstacles to the perception of the divine presence that is always there. Our ordinary mind, filled with the incessant noise of worries, desires, and distractions, functions as a poorly tuned receiver, unable to pick up the divine signals that continually emanate from the heavenly realms. Contemplative disciplines work like fine-tuning on this receiver, allowing for greater clarity of reception. Isn't it fascinating that, in an age dominated by digital stimuli and fragmentation of attention, these ancient practices of focusing and internal silencing are being rediscovered as essential for psychological and spiritual well-being? The influence of the three heavens manifests itself not only in individual experience, but in the collective movements of human history. Periods of spiritual renewal, cultural transformation, scientific or artistic advancement can be understood as moments of intensified permeability between the heavenly realms and the collective human consciousness. The theologian Teilhard de Chardin described these moments as eruptions of the divine in human evolution, transformative influxes that raise the collective consciousness to new heights. Conversely, periods of moral decline, systematic violence, and intellectual obscurantism can reflect the intensification of negative influences emanating from the second heaven. Historian Christopher Dawson, analyzing the cycles of rise and fall of civilizations, identified spiritual vitality as a determining factor for cultural flourishing. When a society closes itself off to higher celestial influences, whether through dogmatic materialism, philosophical nihilism, or religious corruption, it inevitably succumbs to lower influences, initiating processes of disintegration. Aren't we witnessing the effects of this spiritual dynamic in our own civilization today? The convergence between contemporary scientific discoveries and the ancient descriptions of the three heavens represents one of the most fascinating developments in current thinking. Modern cosmology, in revealing the layered structure of the universe, from the Earth's atmosphere to the vast interplanetary cosmos, and finally the hypothetical dimensions beyond space-time, surprisingly echoes the ancient description of the three heavens. Quantum physics, by demonstrating that fundamental reality transcends our conventional categories of space, time, and materiality, offers a scientific paradigm that more easily accommodates the possibility of transcendental celestial dimensions. The theoretical physicist Bernard D.S. based on the philosophical implications of quantum mechanics, proposed the concept of veiled reality, a dimension of reality that underlies the observable universe, but which remains inaccessible to direct observation. Isn't it extraordinary how this contemporary scientific conception resonates with the biblical description of the third heaven as a reality that transcends our ordinary perceptive capacity? The three heavens can also be understood as a cartography of human consciousness itself. The first heaven would correspond to the ordinary levels of sensory perception and discursive consciousness, the realm of calculative reason, sensory perception, and conceptual language. The second heaven would represent the realm of deep intuition, creative imagination, and archetypal perception, those dimensions of consciousness that transcend the merely rational, but still operate through comprehensible images and symbols. The third heaven would correspond to the deepest contemplative states, what mystics call unitive knowledge or non-dual consciousness, where knower and known, subject and object, merge in an experience of transcendental unity. This perspective allows us to recognize that the three heavens are not just external realities, but dimensions of human interiority itself, accessible through appropriate contemplative practices. As St. Augustine observed, Don't go outside yourself, turn inward. Within man dwells truth. Wouldn't this inner cartography of the three heavens be the key to understanding both mystical accounts and the discoveries of depth psychology? The ethical implications of the cosmology of the three heavens are profound and transformative. If we live simultaneously in three dimensions of reality, physical, spiritual, and transcendental, then our actions have resonances and consequences far beyond the immediate material realm. An act of love or justice doesn't just produce its visible earthly effects, but resonates through the second heaven, generating waves of spiritual influence, and finally resonates in the third heaven, where it is eternally preserved and transfigured. In the same way, acts of cruelty, injustice, or dehumanization not only produce immediate physical suffering, but strengthen patterns of demonic influence in the second heaven and create dissonances that require redemptive resolution on the plane of the third heaven. This multidimensional perspective radically transforms our understanding of the cosmic significance of human action. As the contemporary philosopher David Bentley Hart observed, every moral gesture, however insignificant it may seem, has eternal resonances, because it participates simultaneously in the three heavenly dimensions that make up integral reality. Finally, understanding the three heavens offers us an integrated view of the human journey, both individual and collective. Throughout human history, the three heavens have not remained abstract concepts or distant theological theories, but have manifested themselves concretely through events, phenomena, and experiences that have transformed individuals and entire civilizations. From celestial apparitions documented in various cultures to profound mystical experiences reported with remarkable consistency over the centuries, there is a vast corpus of evidence suggesting that the interaction between the heavenly realms and earthly reality is more common and significant than our contemporary materialistic outlook is willing to acknowledge. How can we interpret this abundance of converging testimonies that cross cultural, geographical, and temporal barriers? Could it be that a technological civilization like ours, by exclusively privileging empirical materialist knowledge, has paradoxically become less able to perceive fundamental dimensions of reality that our ancestors understood intuitively? The manifestations of the first heaven, the atmospheric realm, are the most easily recognizable and documented. Throughout biblical history, we find numerous accounts where extraordinary atmospheric phenomena signal moments of divine intervention. The pillar of cloud that guided the Israelites in the desert, the fire that descended from heaven on Mount Carmel during the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, the darkened sky during Christ's crucifixion. Significantly, these phenomena are not presented as mere natural coincidences, but as intentional signs where the physical realm becomes a vehicle for divine communication. In later Christian tradition, similar phenomena were documented at historically decisive moments. The "in hoc signo vinces," "in this sign you will win," that Constantine witnessed in the skies before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, the atmospheric manifestations in Fatima, Portugal, witnessed by tens of thousands of people, including skeptics and journalists. Such events suggest that the first sky can become, at specific moments, a cosmic canvas where divine messages are inscribed visibly and publicly. Isn't this precisely the function that the psalmist attributed to the physical heavens, to declare the glory of God? The manifestations of the second heaven, the intermediate spiritual realm, are documented with particular abundance in accounts of confrontations between benevolent and malignant spiritual forces. In the scriptures, the narrative of Daniel and the Prince of Persia offers an extraordinary glimpse into this dimension. In the apostolic period, the exorcisms performed by Jesus and his disciples demonstrated authority over evil spiritual entities operating from the second heaven. Throughout the history of the Church, saints such as Anthony of the Desert, Padre Pio, and many others have documented direct confrontations with demonic forces. What is remarkable is not only the occurrence of these phenomena, but their phenomenological consistency across completely different cultures and historical periods. Anthropologists who have studied manifestations of spirit possession in various religious traditions, from Haitian voodoo to Siberian shamanism, have found surprisingly consistent patterns, suggesting that they are documenting encounters with objective realities from the second heaven, and not merely arbitrary cultural constructs. Even in the contemporary secular era, psychiatrists like M. Scott Peck, initially skeptical, have documented cases that have led them to acknowledge the reality of negative spiritual influences that transcend purely psychological explanations. How can we understand this transcultural and transhistorical persistence of consistent spiritual phenomena, if not as evidence of the objective reality of the second heaven? The manifestations of the third heaven, the domain of divine glory, are necessarily rarer and more reserved, given their transcendental character. However, the spiritual history of humanity is dotted with extraordinary accounts of rapture experiences similar to Paul's, moments of spiritual elevation where individuals directly experience heavenly reality. Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Juliana of Norwich, Thomas Merton, Sundar Singh, mystics from different eras and traditions have described states of consciousness where they experienced what can only be characterized as glimpses of the third heaven. Neuroscientist Andrew Newberg, studying the brains of deep contemplatives during mystical experiences, has documented unique patterns of neural activity that suggest states of consciousness qualitatively distinct from ordinary perception. Significantly, those who report such experiences often return fundamentally transformed, with extraordinary levels of compassion, wisdom, and detachment that remain stable throughout their subsequent lives. These profound and lasting transformations suggest that these individuals are not merely having subjective experiences, but encountering an objective reality that leaves indelible marks on their being. How else can we explain the phenomenological consistency of these experiences across radically different cultures, if not as evidence of an objective transcendental reality, the third heaven, that occasionally reveals itself to human consciousness? Various religious and spiritual traditions, although using different terminologies and conceptual frameworks, converge remarkably in their descriptions of the multi-level structure of the heavenly realms. Kabbalistic Judaism describes 10 sefirot, or spheres of reality emanating from the Ein Sof, the infinite. Tibetan Buddhism maps out various bardas, or intermediate states between earthly existence and complete enlightenment. Hindu cosmology distinguishes 7 lokas, or ascending planes of existence. Native American traditions speak of the upper, middle, and lower worlds. Neoplatonism distinguishes between the sensible world, the intellectual world, and the transcendent one. This structural convergence between traditions that have no historical contact with each other suggests that they are mapping, through different symbolic systems, the same objective cosmic reality. The religious anthropologist Mircea Eliade, after decades of studying spiritual traditions globally, concluded that this tripartite structure of the cosmos represents a universal archetype present in practically all pre-modern cultures. Could it be that these diverse traditions, despite their theological differences, were all perceiving and describing, each through their own cultural lenses, the same fundamental structure of 3 heavens described in the Judeo-Christian scriptures? History documents moments when the barrier between the heavens and the earth seems to temporarily blur, allowing for extraordinary manifestations of the divine presence. These revivals, or spiritual awakenings, from Pentecost to the Great Awakening, the Welsh Revival, the Pentecostal movements of the 20th century, and countless others, share remarkably consistent phenomenological characteristics. Intensified perception of the divine presence, inexplicable physical manifestations, tremors, falls, luminous phenomena. Profound and lasting moral transformations, and often, extraordinary spiritual capacities emerging in ordinary people. Religious historian Edwin Orr, after systematically studying these movements globally, concluded that they follow consistent patterns that transcend purely sociological or psychological explanations. Significantly, these revivals often occur simultaneously in geographically distant regions with no communication between them, suggesting a common transcendent source, as if the portals between heaven and earth opened at certain historical moments, allowing extraordinary influxes of divine presence and power. Aren't these historical moments revealing precisely the permeability between the 3 heavens and earthly reality that the scriptures describe? The near-death experiences, NDEs, that have been scientifically documented in recent decades provide intriguing evidence of the reality of the heavenly realms. Cardiologist Pim van Lommel, neurosurgeon Eben Alexander, and psychiatrist Raymond Moody have documented thousands of cases where clinically dead patients, with no detectable brain activity, later report extraordinarily vivid lucid experiences that often include movement through a tunnel, meeting luminous beings, a panoramic review of life, and glimpses of a realm of indescribable beauty and peace. The most significant aspect of these experiences is not their mere occurrence, which could be attributed to hallucinations generated by a collapsed brain, but rather 1, the ability of these patients to accurately report events that occurred while they were clinically dead, 2, the profound and lasting transformations in their values and perspectives after the experience, and 3, the phenomenological consistency of the reports across diverse cultures, ages, and previous beliefs. Dr. Alexander himself, initially skeptical after his own NDE during a deep coma caused by meningitis, when his neocortex was completely inactive, concluded that his consciousness had accessed a transcendental realm that could not be explained as the product of brain activity. These experiences suggest precisely what the scriptures state, that human consciousness can, in certain circumstances, temporarily transcend the physical realm and directly experience the higher heavenly realms. History records multiple cases of celestial synchronicities, moments when events in the physical heavens coincided significantly with earthly historical events, suggesting a non-causal but significant interconnection between the realms. The Star of Bethlehem that guided the Magi to the newborn Christ, the darkened sky during the crucifixion, the celestial phenomena that preceded the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, documented by the historian Josephus, the accounts of celestial visions that preceded major historical transformations such as the conversion of Constantine, all suggest that the physical heavens can occasionally become texts, where the divine will is inscribed legibly for those with eyes to see. The astronomer Johannes Kepler, far from seeing a conflict between his Christian faith and his science, considered his astronomical work as a way of thinking God's thoughts after him. For Kepler, the mathematical laws he discovered in the celestial movements were not merely mechanical descriptions, but reflections of the divine mind expressed in the language of mathematics. This sacramental perspective of the cosmos, where the visible manifests the invisible, the physical expresses the spiritual, is precisely what the doctrine of the three heavens proposes. Not completely separate realms, but interconnected dimensions of the one reality created and sustained by God. Testimonies of angelic encounters have persisted throughout human history and continue into the contemporary era. From the perspective of the three heavens, by contemplating the magnificent structure of the three heavens, we are invited to transcend the fragmentation of our contemporary vision and recover a unified understanding of reality. This tripartite cosmology is not just a theological curiosity or a relic of ancient worldviews, but an integral map of reality that integrates the physical, the spiritual, and the transcendental into a single coherent vision. The three heavens, atmospheric, stellar/spiritual, and divine, are not isolated domains, but interconnected dimensions of a single creation, reflecting the triune nature of the Creator himself. In our intellectually fragmented world, where science, spirituality, and philosophy often exist in watertight compartments, the doctrine of the three heavens offers a unifying paradigm that honors both the materiality of creation and its spiritual depth and transcendental destiny. Isn't this integration precisely the antidote to the cultural schizophrenia of our time, which oscillates between reductionist materialism and disembodied spiritualism, unable to reconcile them in a coherent vision? Understanding the three heavens fundamentally transforms our self-perception and identity. We recognize that we are simultaneously physical beings rooted in the first heaven, participants in a spiritual battle taking place in the second heaven, and bearers of an eternal destiny in the third heaven. This triple cosmic citizenship frees us both from the materialism that reduces us to purely biological entities, and from the Gnostic spiritualism that despises bodily reality. Instead, it offers an integral anthropology where body, soul, and spirit are equally valued and integrated. When we internalize this three-dimensional view of our existence, we experience a remarkable existential reorientation. We are not merely surviving on an isolated physical planet. We are participating in a multidimensional cosmic drama. Every thought, choice, and action has resonances that extend across all three levels of reality. Our daily struggles, seemingly insignificant from a purely earthly perspective, acquire cosmic dignity when understood as localized manifestations of a spiritual battle that spans multiple dimensions of reality. As theologian N.T. Wright put it, heaven is not a distant place, but a different dimension of God-created reality that constantly intersects with our familiar world. This three-dimensional worldview profoundly transforms our understanding of prayer and contemplative life. Prayer is no longer a mere one-way transmission of petitions or desires, but a conscious participation in the multidimensional reality of heaven. When we pray, we are not merely emitting thoughts or words into the void. We are actively participating in a reality that transcends the spatio-temporal limitations of the first heaven, engaging in the spiritual conflict of the second heaven, and opening ourselves to the transforming influence of the third heaven. Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." This petition is not merely a pious wish, but an invocation for the realities of the higher heavens to progressively manifest themselves in the earthly realm. Through contemplative prayer, we develop the ability to consciously perceive and participate in the interconnectedness of the three heavens, living simultaneously in physical reality while becoming increasingly aware of the spiritual and transcendental dimensions that permeate and sustain it. Isn't this expanded awareness of the three heavens the very meaning of spiritual growth? The progressive ability to perceive and participate in the multiple dimensions of divine reality? Understanding the three heavens transforms our relationship with the natural world. Far from desacralizing nature, as scientific materialism does, or depreciating it as a mere illusion, as certain spiritualisms do, this vision recognizes the physical world as a genuine, albeit initial, expression of divine creation. The first heaven, with its atmospheric beauty, seasonal cycles, and intricate biological processes, is not merely a temporary setting for human drama, but an integral participant in the divine plan. When we contemplate an extraordinary sunset, witness the birth of a child, or marvel at the complexity of an ecosystem, we are glimpsing windows into the divine glory that will eventually be fully manifested. As the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins put it, the world is charged with the greatness of God. Caring for creation, therefore, is not merely preserving resources for future human generations, but honoring and participating in the divine work that interconnects the three heavens. Our current ecological crisis can be understood as a direct consequence of a fragmented vision that separates the first heaven, physical reality, from its spiritual and transcendental dimensions, allowing its exploitation and degradation without regard for its deeper meaning. Isn't it fascinating to realize how a proper understanding of the three heavens could underpin not only our spirituality, but also our environmental ethics? The doctrine of the three heavens provides a powerful interpretive framework for understanding suffering and evil. By recognizing that we inhabit a multidimensional cosmos where antagonistic spiritual forces vie for influence, we understand that many forms of evil and suffering are not simply natural or inevitable, but manifestations in the first heaven of spiritual conflicts originating in the second heaven. This perspective frees us from both fatalism, it's simply God's will, and nihilistic despair, the universe is indifferent to suffering. Instead, we recognize that we are involved in a genuine cosmic battle, where our choices, prayers, and actions have objective significance in determining the outcome. At the same time, the reality of the third heaven assures us that, although the battle is real and its consequences painful, the final outcome is already guaranteed. The complete redemption of all creation and the full manifestation of divine glory are the inescapable destiny of the cosmos. As Paul puts it, the sufferings of this present time cannot be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in us. This tension between present battle and future victory ensures that we can face suffering without minimizing it or being overwhelmed by it, precisely because we understand it in the integral context of the three heavens, where evil is simultaneously real, fought against, and ultimately defeated. The scriptures present cosmic history not as a uniform linear progression, but as a drama in three acts unfolding simultaneously in the three heavens. The first act, creation, established the three-dimensional structure of the cosmos, with each level reflecting distinct but complementary aspects of the divine nature. The second act, fall and redemption, introduced a rupture in the original harmony of the three heavens, followed by divine restorative intervention culminating in the incarnation, death, and resurrection of Christ, events which, although they occurred in the first heaven, have transformative implications for all three levels of reality. The third act, still unfolding, consummation, involves the progressive interpenetration of the three heavens, culminating in the full manifestation of the kingdom of God, described in Revelation as the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. In this consummation, the separation between the three heavens will be transcended, not through the elimination of materiality, as Gnostic visions suggest, nor through the reduction of everything to the physical plane, as materialist visions propose, but through the transfiguration of all created reality. As visualized by the Apostle John, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. Behold the tabernacle of God with men. God will dwell with them. This vision represents not a human escape to a distant heaven, but the full manifestation of divine reality, the third heaven, in the renewed creation, the first and second heavens. The understanding of the three heavens has profound implications for human spiritual development. The deepest contemplative traditions recognize that authentic spiritual growth involves a progressive capacity to consciously perceive and participate in the three dimensions of reality. In the early stages, we develop awareness of the sacred present in the physical world, first heaven, learning to recognize the divine presence in natural beauty, in sacraments, in meaningful human encounters. In the intermediate stages, we become progressively aware of the spiritual dimension of reality, second heaven, developing discernment about spiritual influences, engaging more effectively in intercessory prayer, experiencing inspired guidance. In the later stages, we begin to experience glimpses of the transcendental reality of the third heaven, contemplative states of mystical union, non-dual awareness, knowledge by identity with the divine. The medieval mystic Master Eckhart described this process as progressive deification, not becoming gods, but participating ever more fully in the divine life that permeates the three heavens. Significantly, this development does not imply disregarding the previous stages, but integrating them into an ever more comprehensive consciousness that simultaneously honors the physical, the spiritual, and the transcendental. Isn't this progressive development of the awareness of the three heavens the true meaning of spiritual maturity? The tragedy of the modern/postmodern worldview is precisely its inability to integrate the three heavens into a coherent vision. Scientific materialism, fixated exclusively on the first heaven, has produced extraordinary technological advances, but at the cost of a devastating spiritual impoverishment, a civilization that is technically sophisticated but existentially disoriented. Various contemporary spiritualist movements, reacting to this materialism, often gravitate towards disembodied versions of spirituality that downplay the physical world and ignore the spiritual battle royal of the second heaven. Postmodern philosophies, recognizing the limitations of both approaches, often fall back on a relativism that completely abandons the search for an integral vision. The doctrine of the three heavens offers precisely what our fragmented civilization needs most, a paradigm that simultaneously honors scientific discoveries about the physical world, first heaven, acknowledges the reality of spiritual dimensions that transcend it, second heaven, and points to an ultimate transcendence that confers meaning and purpose to the whole structure, third heaven. As philosopher Charles Taylor observed, we live in a secular age, characterized not by the absence of spirituality, but by the uncoordinated multiplication of spiritual options without an integrating structure. The doctrine of the three heavens offers precisely this structure, not as a rigid dogmatic system, but as an integral cosmological map that guides spiritual exploration while honoring the diversity of paths and experiences. The ethical implications of this three-dimensional vision are profound and revolutionary. When we recognize that the physical reality of the first heaven is permeated by the spiritual dimensions of the second heaven and grounded in the transcendence of the third heaven, our ethical approach transcends both utilitarian pragmatism and disembodied formalism. Every human encounter, every ethical decision, every cultural activity takes place simultaneously in all three dimensions, producing tangible physical effects, participating in invisible spiritual battles, and aligning with or opposing transcendental divine purpose. This three-dimensional ethical awareness allows us to overcome false dichotomies that fragment our civilization, between social justice and spiritual transformation, between ecological care and economic development, between fidelity to tradition and openness to the new. Instead of choosing between these apparently contradictory dimensions, we can integrate them in an approach that simultaneously honors the physical needs, the spiritual reality, and the transcendental purpose of each situation. As the prophet Micah expressed it in a formulation that implicitly integrates the three heavens. He has declared to you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, first heaven, and to love mercy, second heaven, and to walk humbly with your God, third heaven. Isn't this three-dimensional ethical approach precisely what our fragmented world most urgently needs? Finally, the doctrine of the three heavens confronts us with a decisive invitation. We can continue to live unconsciously, as if only the first heaven, physical reality, existed, ignoring the spiritual and transcendental dimensions that permeate and sustain it. Or we can embark on the extraordinary journey of developing active awareness of the three heavenly dimensions that make up integral reality, learning to perceive the spiritual and the physical, to recognize the transcendental and the ordinary, to live simultaneously rooted on earth and connected to heaven. This is not merely an intellectual choice, but an existential one, fundamentally affecting how we experience our existence moment by moment. Those who develop this three-dimensional awareness report a qualitative transformation of experience. The world no longer seems flat and one-dimensional, but deep, meaningful, permeated with presence. Colors become more vibrant, human encounters more meaningful, natural beauty more revealing, suffering more bearable because it is contextualized in a larger story. It's as if a new perceptual dimension opens up, revealing that what seemed to be only surface was always depth waiting to be recognized. Jesus described this perceptual transformation when he declared, "The kingdom of heaven is at hand." Not distant in space or time, but immediately present for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. This is the supreme invitation of the doctrine of the three heavens. Not merely to believe in their existence as a theory, but to experience them as a living reality, here and now, transforming our perception of the ordinary into recognition of the extraordinary that has always inhabited it, waiting to be discovered. This integral understanding of the three heavens invites us on an endless journey of discovery and wonder. Every sunset contemplated, every meaningful human encounter, every moment of beauty or truth recognized becomes a window, not just to the first physical heaven that our senses immediately perceive, but to the second spiritual heaven that permeates it and the third transcendental heaven that underlies it. We live in a reality that is infinitely richer, deeper, and more meaningful than our contemporary cultural paradigm has allowed us to recognize. The universe is not merely matter in random motion, nor a mere temporary stage for our individual spiritual drama, but a magnificent multidimensional creation where heavens and earth intertwine in a cosmic dance of meaning and purpose. In this dance, we are simultaneously participants and witnesses, co-creators and recipients, actors and audience. Our human journey, with its joys and sorrows, achievements and failures, does not take place isolated in a material bubble, but is integrated into a cosmic drama that encompasses the three heavens and will culminate in the full manifestation of divine glory in all creation. When we understand and live from this truth, we experience what the psalmist described millennia ago. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims the work of his hands. Not as an abstract poetic statement, but as a reality that can be experienced moment by moment, as we learn to perceive and participate in the three heavens which, although distinct in their manifestations, are inseparable in their essence, a unified cosmos whose ultimate purpose is to manifest, in progressively fuller dimensions, the infinite glory of its creator. This three-dimensional understanding invites us to live more consciously at all levels of our existence, honoring the body and the natural world as genuine expressions of divine creation, engaging lucidly in the spiritual battle for good and truth, and keeping our hearts anchored in the transcendental reality that is our origin and destiny. May we, each day, develop a greater capacity to perceive and participate in these three heavens that are not distant, but present here and now, waiting to be recognized through the eyes of faith, hope, and love. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected for you some videos full of profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards